Hey everyone, we are doing section 3 of chapter 2 today. This section is on polynomial long division, which you may have been familiar with. We're going to be reviewing that concept in pre-calculus. Basically the idea is if you have a long polynomial and you know at least one of the factors, you can divide that factor out of the polynomial and then use the remaining terms to continue factoring this polynomial. So it's kind of like the first step in factoring a really long polynomial. So the problems that you're going to be seeing, they're going to give you a polynomial and they're going to tell you one of the factors. So we know that x minus 3 is a factor. Knowing that if we divide the x minus 3 out and figure out what remains, we can then use that to factor it further. So we're going to start with x minus 3. That's going to be our divisor. X minus 3. We're going to divide that into the polynomial itself, which was 6x cubed minus 25x squared plus 18x plus 9. We don't really need parentheses there. So the way you do long division is you look at the first term in both the dividend and the divisor. And those are the only ones you're really concerned with dividing. So I'm going to take 6x cubed, I'm going to divide that by x. So 6x cubed divided by x is 6x squared. Now, if you do it correctly, you should keep all of your cube terms in columns, you should keep all of your squared terms in columns, all of your x terms, and all of your constants in a column. So when I do 6x cubed divided by x and I get the answer 6x squared, I know to keep the 6x squared above in this x squared column. Okay? And you'll see in a second why that's important because we're about to subtract. So once you figure out what you get when you divide the leading terms, you want to see how much is going to be subtracted from the overall polynomial. So what we do is we take the 6x squared and we distribute it to the binomial that we're dividing by. So 6x squared times x is 6x cubed. So we can subtract out the 6x cubed, and 6x squared times negative 3 is negative 18x squared. We can also subtract out a negative 18x squared. Those terms we subtract from the original polynomial function. So if you did it correctly, these first terms should always cancel out. The reason being we actually physically divided the 6x cubed by x to get this term. Now the negative 25x squared minus negative 18x squared, remember subtracting a negative is like adding a positive. So it's like we're adding 18x squared there, gives us negative 7x squareds. Okay, so we still have negative 7x squareds left to divide out. We're going to also have our 18x and our 9x that we want to divide out eventually as well. So the subtraction portion really just shows us how much is left for us to divide. So we're going to take the negative 7x squared, we're going to repeat the process now. This is our new leading coefficient, this is our new leading term. We're going to take this leading term and divide it by the leading term out here. So negative 7x squared divided by x is negative 7x. Again, keep your x's in columns with each other. So my negative 7x, when I redistribute it out here, shows me that I can remove a negative 7x squared, which is good, we want those to cancel. Negative 7x times negative 3 is positive 21x's, so we can remove 21x's as well. So we're going to subtract both of those terms. I always put parentheses around it to remind me that I'm subtracting both of the terms. So negative 7x squared minus negative 7x squared, that cancels like it should. 18x minus 21x is negative 3x. And we carry down the plus 9 that's remaining. And now, one last time, we're going to take the leading term. We have negative 3x plus 9 remaining. Negative 3x divided by x is negative 3. And when we distribute that, negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. We should get no remainder because this is a factor. If it's a factor, there should be nothing left over. So now we can say, okay, if this is one of my factors for my polynomial, I know that if I take x minus 3 and multiply it by this expression up here, it should go back to the original polynomial. So we can say we factored to get x minus 3 times 6x squared minus 7x minus 3. And if you wanted to, you could FOIL this and you would see that it would go back to the original polynomial we started with. But our goal is to factor completely. So we don't want to distribute. Instead, we want to take this trinomial and factor it any further that we can. So we don't have a leading coefficient of 1, we have a leading coefficient of 6. So you take the leading coefficient times the constant, that's negative 18. find factors of negative 18 that add up to negative 7. That would be negative 9 and 2. And we're going to rewrite this as 6x squared minus 9x plus 2x minus 3. And then we factor by parts. We can pull out 3x. This is 2x minus 3. And we can only factor out a 1 here, so this is still 2x minus 3. And then we factor out 2x minus 3, and we get 3x plus 1 left over times the 2x minus 3. Okay, so there's our completely factored polynomial. And again, if you redistributed that, it would go back to being 6x cubed minus 25x squared plus 18x plus 9. Okay, so I want you to try this one on your own really quick. Just do 1a. Don't worry about doing 1b. I just want you to get practice with one of these. I'll put up the answer in just a few seconds. Okay, so if you factored it completely, you should have gotten x plus 6 times x plus 2 times x minus 1. Just make sure that when you subtract for each row that you subtract every single term. That's the most common mistake, is that people forget that all of these terms that you get when you distribute need to be subtracted from the previous one, because you're trying to find out what's left over, what's remaining. This one, because we know that x plus 6 is a factor, we know we should end up with a remainder of 0. So if you didn't get a remainder of 0, you should go back and rework it. Okay? Alright, the next step we're going to try is when you have a long division with a non-zero remainder. So what happens if you do try to do a long division, but the remainder isn't 0? Well, the first thing you should know is that it's no longer a factor of the polynomial. And we're not saying that it is. The previous problems were telling us that what we're dividing by was a factor. We don't know whether 3x plus 2 is a factor or not. If we get a 0 remainder, then it is. If we get a non-zero remainder, hint, hint, we probably will, then it's not a factor, but we can still find the solution. So 9x cubed minus x minus 3, we're going to divide that by 3x plus 2. So we're going to stick the 3x plus 2 out front. And underneath the divisor bar, we're going to write 9x cubed. Now remember, we're supposed to keep our columns in organized with their types of terms. Notice that there's no x squared, so we actually want to hold that place. I always write in as 0x squared, just so that I remember that I have to have a column for any x squared terms that I get while I'm doing this process. So then we take our first term, which is 9x cubed. We divide that by our first term outside here. It's the same process we did before. 9x cubed divided by 3x is 3x squared. And so our answer goes in the x squared column. That's why I had that 0x squared there to keep its place. And then we distribute. So we're going to multiply 3x squared times 3x is 9x cubed. 3x squared times 2 is 6x squared. And then we subtract these from our original polynomial. So 9x cubed minus 9x cubed cancels. 0 minus 6x squared is negative 6x squared. And then we carry down the negative x and the negative 3. Now again, we're only looking at the leading term. The leading term is negative 6x squared. Negative 6x squared divided by 3x is negative 2x. So that goes in my x column. Negative 2x times 3x is negative 6x squared. Negative 2x times 2 is negative 4x. So remember, we're not adding these together, we're subtracting them. So the negative 6x squareds will cancel. Negative x minus negative 4x. So if it helps, write in that this is actually adding 4x so you don't get messed up. Negative x plus 4x is 3x. So we have 3x. And bring down the minus 3. 3x minus 3, my first term is 3x. 3x divided by 3x is 1, so this is plus 1. When we distribute, we get 3x plus 2. And so we can see that we're not going to get 0 for our remainder like we did in the first two problems. Instead, we get negative 3 minus 2, we get negative 5. So what do you do if you do have a remainder? Well, that means that we need a little bit more in our answer in order to completely divide by 3x plus 2. We're going to also need to have a negative 5. So we're going to have 5 left over, and that's negative 5 over what we were dividing by, 3x plus 2. Because remember, we're saying if we take 3x plus 2 and multiply it by all these terms, we'll get the original polynomial. Well, we're supposed to have 5 left over, so we want to take that remainder, and we'll get that if we multiply it by 3x plus 2. So that's your answer. Okay. So here's one for you to try on your own. And there's the solution. If you did the division correctly, you should have gotten -2 as your remainder. So I would go through each step and make sure that I got the right term. If you got the first term right but the second one wrong, look at that second step and see if you had the right leading term right here when you subtract it out. So every blue line, that's the leading term that you were supposed to divide by each time. So 8x cubed divided by 2x is this. -6x squared divided by 2x is this. 12x divided by 2x is 6. So that's a good way for you to check your work. And then once you see your remainder down here, if you got -2 for your remainder, just make sure you wrote it correctly. That you keep the -2 in the numerator, and then the divisor, or what you're dividing by, is your dividend up here, the 2x minus 3. Okay. We have one last problem we're going to go through today, and that's what to do if you have a polynomial with a degree 2 or higher. So again, the process is pretty much the same. The only difference is that we have a little bit higher degrees now. So we have x squared minus 2x plus 7. And we're going to divide that into 2x to the fourth minus 4x cubed plus 13x squared. So we have a place for every single type of term: the fourth, the third, the second, the linear, and the constant. We're going to take our leading terms and divide them. 2x to the fourth divided by x squared. 2x to the fourth divided by x squared is 2x squared. So we get to jump all the way over to our x squared column, 2x squared. And when we distribute, we have to make sure we distribute to all three of the terms out here. So that's the only difference really. 2x squared times x squared is 2x to the fourth. So that will subtract away. 2x squared times -2x is -4x cubed. 2x squared times 7 is 14x squared. And then we're going to subtract each of those terms from the previous polynomial. The first term cancels out like it should. The second one, we get lucky here. It also cancels out. So -4x cubed minus -4x cubed, that will cancel into zeros. That won't always happen. If it doesn't happen, you just continue as normal. But if it does, it actually makes the problem a little bit shorter. So 13x squared minus 14x squared is -x squared. That's our new leading term. So now we bring down the plus 3x and then -11. And now we get to jump to the -x squared over here. So -x squared divided by x squared is -1. Because we got to skip this column, we're also going to skip this column in our answer. So -x squared divided by x squared is -1. So we're pretty much at our solution now. We just need to distribute the -1 and see what's left over. So that's -x squared. -1 times -2x is positive 2x. And -1 times 7 is -7. And then we subtract each of those terms from the previous one. So 3x minus 2x is x. -11 minus -7, that's -4. Okay, now we can't divide this term by our leading term out here. Once the leading term down here is of a lower degree than what we're dividing by, we're pretty much done. And you can see that we filled in all of our columns. So this is going to be our whole remainder now. You can have an expression as your remainder. So my remainder is plus x minus 4 over x squared minus 2x plus 7. Okay, and you can push this together if you want and write it as a final expression like this. That is your answer. Okay, I have one last one for you to try on your own. Oops, I didn't clear it. There you go. Now try it on your own. I'll put up the answer in just a few seconds. Okay, so this one, very similar to all the ones we've been doing. Again, check to make sure that you're getting the right leading term every time you subtract out. 2x minus 1 should have been your answer with 4x plus 2 remaining. Yes, you could have factored out this expression if you wanted to, but nothing was going to cancel, so I just left it as it was. Alright, well that's it for today. We will practice more polynomial long division in class on Monday. Have a great weekend.